All right. Hey everyone, thanks for joining in for another live stream here on the Riffimonos YouTube channel. I'm really excited about today's visualization. A couple months ago or so, somebody in the comments to one of my videos asked, they noticed that I spend a lot of time recreating other people's plots. And they asked if I prefer to do that versus making plots of my own data, making plots from scratch. And that kind of occurred to me like, yeah, I do spend a lot of time recreating other people's plots on this channel. And the motivation for making other people's plots was to basically expand my tool set or your tool set and kind of help us to learn R and ggplot2 and its related packages all the better. A lot like an artist might, right? So if you ever go to an art gallery, an art museum, you'll see people with sketch pads kind of trying to recreate what the past masters of art have done. And so that's kind of my goal here, is to take visualizations that other people have created over the years, or over the last couple weeks more recently, right? And to then, again, expand my tool set so that I'm better and you're better at using these tools. But if we never go back and kind of recreate our own visualizations, well, then we're just learning a bunch of stuff and not applying it for our own stuff. And the volume, it sounds like, is low. Let's see if that's any better. And I know there's also volume on your YouTube controls, and I think sometimes that might be turned down for people. I know that with me, what I'm seeing for my readout is that I'm starting to clip, or if I go up much louder than this, it's going to start clipping. So anyway, so what we're going to do in today is take the visualization I made in the last episode and adapt it using a visualization that I made a number of episodes back, okay? And so that's what we're going to do today in ggplot2. I'm going to do this all live coding here with you, and then at the end of this broadcast, I'll go ahead and post everything up to the website. And when you are watching this later, down below in the description for this episode, you'll see a link to a blog post where you can go and get all of the code. And so if we look at this page, this is an article from Our World in Data, which has a lot of great data visualizations about every type of data. Earlier in February, Saloni, Datani, and Lucas Rodez-Guerrero created this article, The Baby Boom in 7 Charts. And as I talked about last week, there's a lot of really cool charts in here that we could spend time making, and things that look a lot like what we've made in the past. But the chart that I made last week was this, where'd you go? This kind of infographic type display, right? Where it's a ridgeline plot showing for women born in each year what their fertility rates were over the course of their reproductive years, right? So for a woman born in 1925, what did her fertility rate look like between the ages of about 15, or I guess it went down to 12 and up to about 55, right? And so this is really cool, right? It's also an infographic, and so it allowed us to kind of explore how we would give it that infographic vibe, right? And so a couple critiques of this though, right? So one critique, let me kind of zoom out on this a little bit so we can see the whole thing. All right, where'd you go? I think I went too far down. Okay, right there. So one critique of this is that it's really hard to compare the heights of the different ridgelines, right? They do have the fill color set to the age-specific fertility rate, as we see over here. But I can't really easily see how much higher this peak is, where my pointer is, compared to, say, down here, right? I know it's more, but I don't really know how much more it is, right? And so that's a challenge. Also, when we think about the baby boom was a period in history between the years of, I believe, 1946 and 1964, I want to say. And it's not so much a cohort-based effect, right? It's more of a time period effect. And so keying everything to that cohort of women seems a little bit odd to me, right? What would make more sense to me would be to have something like, I don't know, like the year across the x-axis, maybe the y-axis, the age, and then some indication of the fertility rate. So that could either be done, again, with the ridgeline plot, or like we're going to do in today's episode, we could make this into a heat map. So if you've been watching for a while this channel, you'll know that I think back in February, I did a recreation of a plot from the New York Times, Upshot, where they had an article called How Drug Overdose Deaths Have Plagued One Generation of Black Men for Decades. It's a really compelling story where they use this type of heat map, again, with year across the x-axis, age on the y-axis, and then the fill color set to the number of deaths per 100,000 people. And it's a scrolly telling article. So as I scroll, more and more stuff pops up. So this is about prostate cancer, gun homicides, right? And then this then is about overdose death rates, right? Where they see a cohort-based effect that men who were, I guess, born probably in like 1970 have been at a greater propensity of death by overdose to drugs than other methods of death, right? And they did this by different city and different county across the United States. And so I spent a lot of time, I spent one episode basically trying to extract the data from the heat map, and then another episode recreating this actual heat map. And so my thought was, let's make this heat map, but with the baby boom data. So that's what we're going to do in today's episode, today's live stream. Oh, okay. And so hopefully this will give us a chance to kind of revisit some of this stuff with heat maps, but it will also give us a chance to better see how to kind of mix and match data and take what we've learned with one data set and another data set and smash it together for another visualization, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to need different data from the Human Fertility Database website. So let's go ahead and do HF or humanfertility.org. All right, and so again, for this website, to get the data, unfortunately, you do need to register and then log in. And so I'll go ahead and insert my credentials to get access to that. And again, as I mentioned last week, the registration is really simple. It's basically like your name, your email address, a password, and basically promising that you won't post the data to the web. And so, yeah, so we're going to look at USA data. I would really encourage you, if you're not from the United States or if there's a country that interests you, to try it with some other country, okay? And let me find something here. All right, so what we're going to want are the age-specific fertility rate by year and age, okay? And so I think it's right here, this 1933 to 2023. And so if I click on this, I now get the text data. It's not tab delimited, it's a TXT file, as you can see up here. And you can also see it's not tab, because if I kind of drag my cursor across, you see different, you basically see each space, right? Rather than a tab. If it was a tab, it would all light up with one chunk. But here we have the year, the age, and then that age-specific fertility rate, right? So let's go ahead then, and I'm going to copy this link and bring it into a R script that I've already pre-populated. Go ahead and put that link in there. And I'm going to then, let's save this, and I will create it to a, let's see, let's save it to the desktop, and it'll be USA ASFR RR.txt. Okay, so that's saved. And I'll go ahead and load my libraries here. And I'm also loading the Libre Franklin font. That's the font that the New York Times uses as their sans serif font. Okay. All right. So that all the font stuff is loaded, all the libraries are loaded. We're good to go now, right? So let's start by reading that in, right? So we'll go ahead and, sorry, I'm still getting adjusted to all the windows that my software uses for this live stream. So bear with me a second as I kind of flip back and forth between things. I want to be sure that I see chats or comments that you all have. By all means, feel free to pipe up if you have questions about anything, or if you have thoughts on things you'd like me to try, or thoughts or questions about what I'm doing, okay? Let's see. All right. All right, so let's do read underscore txt, or yeah, txt, or text. Read underscore, and then forget what it's called already. This isn't good. I think it's read table. Okay, so we'll do read table, and then it's quote USA ASFR rr.txt. All right, good. So that reads that in, but kind of like we saw for this type of data in the last episode, it has a header line across the top, right? So if we look back here, this line is the header for the file. It's actually got two header lines, right? And read underscore table is treating this like columns. And basically it's saying wherever there's a space, it's a different column name, right? And so now when we come back here, we see that each word in that header is getting chunked up as a different column. So we want to skip those first two lines. So we'll do skip equals 2. And now we find that we have year, age, and ASFR. Cool. Now what I'd like to do is go ahead and turn those column names to be all lowercase. I prefer to work in lowercase because then I don't have to think about the capitalization of different things. If everything's lowercase, that's all I have to think about is everything is in lowercase. So we'll do rename all, and we'll do to lower, and then that will make everything lowercase like we see here, right? Cool. All right. Now what I'd like to do is this age column is a character type, right? Rather than a numerical or a double. It should be DBL like I have here for ASFR, right? And so we saw this again in the last episode. It's nice working with data from the same source because you kind of figure out what they do and you kind of get used to how you need to modify the data so that you can work with it to do what you want to do, right? And so I need to convert this to a double so that kind of the age, the numeric category behaves as I would expect, okay? So we'll go ahead and pipe this to a mutate on age, and I'll do str replace, and we're going to do that on age. So that's the string argument there in str replace. The pattern is going to be a minus sign, and we're going to replace that with nothing, right? And so that still comes up as CHR, right? And that's because I haven't converted it. So let's go ahead and convert that with as.numeric. And I'm getting a warning message, right? And so I'm pretty sure that what's happening is if I scroll back here and go to my previous function call and then do a tail, I see that there is a 55 plus here, right? So I need to remove that plus sign, right? So I could do another str replace, but with regular expressions, I can use that square bracket, which is to the right of the P on a US keyboard, and I can put inside a square brackets whatever characters I want to match. So it'll match a hyphen or a plus sign when I do this. Now I run it, I get no errors, and if I then pipe that to tail, I now see that 55 is 55 rather than 55 plus, and of course age now is of type double, and we're off to the races, right? So again, these are the data that we have. And okay, now what we'd like to do is go ahead and convert this to a heat map. And so the function to make a heat map in ggplot2 is called ggplot. I'm sorry. So the function to make a heat map in ggplot2 is called geom_tile. So we'll go ahead and pipe this to ggplot. And then our aesthetics on the x-axis, I'm going to put the year. The y is going to be the age. And then the fill will be ASFR. And then we'll do geom tile. Okay. I'll also then pipe it out to this fertilitymap.png file. And let's do that real quick here. And I need to open that. I'm doing this on my desktop for some reason, which isn't probably the best idea, but anyway. Here we go. So I have it in a slightly different aspect ratio than what they had in theirs. Sometimes people ask me how I get the aspect ratio to match what they have in theirs. Let me show you how to do that real quick. So in my terminal, I have, well, I guess I've already done it here. Huh. Okay, I wonder why I didn't copy it over. So anyway, if I do file overdose heatmap.png, and let me just clear this out so it's not confusing to people. Okay, so file, I think is a built-in Mac tool, but basically it'll give you information about your files. And when I give it overdose heatmap.png, it returns the aspect ratio. So that's 1566 pixels wide by 1942 pixels high. And so if I know that I want 6-inch width, I then need to figure out the height, right? And so I think actually I may have flipped these. So if I want my width to be 6, then the question is, what should the height be, right? And so if this is the original, I'll paste that in here. Then let's see, so the 1566 is the width. So I'll do 6 divided by 1566 times 1942, and that gives me 7.44. So sure enough, I had these flipped. So we'll do 7.44, not 77. All right. And so now when I look at this, I get something that has an aspect ratio a lot like what we had here for this drug overdose heat map, right? And so again, my goal is to convert this into something that looks vaguely like this, right? So we're on our way. We have this heat map built in, and I think that is looking good. All right. Let's see what to do next. So let's go ahead then and play with the colors, right? The heat map that was in the New York Times used something that looks a lot like what I commonly see with the Viridis package. That's Viridis. A lot of the Viridis package is built into ggplot2. Viridis is a package of color palettes that are nice for heat maps because they have properties that are good for people with color blindness, which is a pretty significant fraction of men, especially. Something like 20% of men have some form of color blindness. So if you're giving a talk to 100 people, then 10 of those people on average will have some form of color blindness. So not mixing red and green is a good thing. And so the Viridis package is there to help you. I haven't done a lot with the Viridis package, and so we're going to play with that a bit. So we'll go ahead and do scale, fill, Viridis. And the Viridis I want is _C. So the _C is continuous, B I think is binned, and D I think is discrete. So let's just try this and see what we get. And so it's here in the background. We now get this Viridis styled heat map, but that doesn't look a lot like this at all, right? So let's go ahead and look at the help for scale fill viridis. And again, there's the D, scale color, scale fill for D, C, and B. Looking at the C, see various arguments, and that there's option D. And let's see what that option D is, because maybe there are other options that we would like to play with. And so sure enough, here in option, I guess I'm hiding myself, aren't I? Sorry about that. All right, still learning the system, so cool. So there's A for Magna, B for Inferno, Plasma C, so forth to Turbo at H, right? And let's go ahead then and try these different options, right? So we'll do option equals A. All right, so that's an option. And one thing that I kind of see though, is that this might be a good option if the scale was flipped, right? So if the lower values were this light color and the higher values were the dark color, that might be good. So I seem to recall an argument in here that was direction. Sets the order of colors if the scale in the scale, if 1, the default colors are ordered from darkest to lightest. If -1, the order of colors is reversed. So let's try that. So let's do direction equals -1. Boom. That looks a lot like this, right? So the New York Times low color is more muted than this yellow. So let's try different options to see if we can get something that might look a little bit closer. So this is B. That's even more yellow. C, more yellow. D, I think I forgot to save it. Has like more green. Here's E. Okay, that's more blue. F brings out more of the red. That actually doesn't look so far off from what they had, right? So I kind of like F. And let's try G and H. So that's more green. And then H. Whoa, okay. That's like a rainbow. Rainbows are bad. I don't know why that's in there. So I kind of like F. So something I'll do then is if we come back to the plotting window, I don't like working in the plotting window because kind of the aspect ratio gets a little bit messed up. So if we kind of scroll back here, so this was H, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. So I think my choice is between A and F. So let's try A again. And then let's try F. Okay, so this was F, and that's A. And let's see what they did. I kind of like F. What do you think? I think we'll go with F. So that'll be good. All right. So again, this was using the scale fill viridis function. It comes built in with ggplot2. And so we then get these different colors for the heat maps, or these different options for the heat map. And we also saw that with direction -1, we can get the scale to go from lightest to darkest, whereas direction equals 1 goes from darkest to lightest. Okay. All right. Eddie, you like A? Okay, I'll go with A. Thanks for thanks for speaking up. All right, that's cool. Great. Now, one other thing that they had in their heat map was that they had a border around each of the tiles, right? If we scroll in or zoom in here, right, we can see that there's a thin white line around everything in theirs. I like that effect because it helps to give some definition to the different cells, right? So we can do that in geom tile by doing color equals white. And so the color of a tile is the border, right? Whereas the fill is the interior color. And so there you go. We see that we have those tiles are bordered now. However, we're going to be moving the legend from the right side to the bottom. So things are going to get wider ultimately. And my fear looking at this is that there's a lot of white, right, for all these tiles. And so we could make the lines thinner. We could also go ahead and remove the border around the plot. We could also bring in the y-axis to be a bit tighter on the data than what we currently have. So let's go ahead and let's start by removing the expansion. So we can do that by adding in chord Cartesian, and we could do expand equals false. And so that pops it out pretty nicely. And for now, let's go ahead and put the legend at the bottom so we have the full width to be looking at. And so to do that, we can use theme, and we can then do legend.position equals bottom. Puts the legend at the bottom. Ultimately, we're going to want it on the right side, but this is good for now. And so again, as I look at this, there's a whole lot of data up here that's basically 0, right? And there's a bunch of data down here that's basically at 0. And so while we do have data going up to 55, the age-specific fertility rate of a 55-year-old is 0, basically, right? And I think we could probably come up to like 47 or so. I know this starts at like 12, 13. So maybe we could start like at 14 on the bottom end. So let's go ahead then. And we're going to want to do this within chord Cartesian because the other option would be to do it in scale y continuous. But if you set limits on scale y continuous, it will then complain if you have data falling outside of that window, right? So this theme is, currently it is the gray theme. And I'll start with gray and we'll end up probably removing or changing a number of the things using the overall theme function. So the built-in theme function, the basic theme is theme underscore gray. And so here then let's do ylim equals C. And so the bottom, I think I said would be, let's do 14. And then let's go up to say 48. Okay. And so one thing I'm seeing is that it is giving me half a tile. And so I think like this was 14, right? But it should probably be like 13 and a half. And this should probably be 48 and a half, okay? So let's do 13.5 and 48.5 so we can get the full tile shape that we see here, right? And that 48, now that I kind of see it at this context, maybe we just go to 45 and a half, okay? And again, what I'm trying to do here is to better frame the data to kind of see what exactly is going on, okay? Good. Let's see. So I think in the end, we might flip the aspect ratio back to what I had initially to make it wider than it is tall. But let's roll with this for now before we get too invested on kind of poking and prodding things. Let's see. McCullage says, a possible correction on the color deficiency claim. All sources I've consigned, it's 8%, but men are 20 times more likely to have it. So out of 100, it should be 4, not 10. Still important. Yep. Is the reason that you don't filter the initial data. So I could totally do that. right? Good point. And so that's one of the things I like about R is that there's many ways to do the same thing. And so that's a great point, Renzi, that we could have come back up here, right? And done like filter age greater than 13 and age less than, say, 46, right? This would have gotten us the same result, right? So let's actually try that. And I think I may have gotten an error message. Let's see. Where did I put in an extra? Let's just do this. There we go. So that basically gave us the same thing, right? And so what you do is really up to you, right? I'm going to go back to using this chord Cartesian approach, but I will leave this in here and I'll say does same thing as setting limit in chord Cartesian. Okay. Thanks for asking that. That's the kind of question that I really like getting in these live streams. So thank you for piping up and asking. That's great. All right. Let's do a little bit more work then on our axes. So again, if we remind ourselves of what this looks like and what theirs looks like, they didn't have titles on the x-axis or y-axis. Actually, they do have the age up at the top. I think it's obvious by these numbers that these are years. And so let's go ahead then and remove the titles. And so I'll come in here after chord Cartesian and do labs, x equals null, y equals null. Oh, and it's unhappy still because I put a comma rather than a plus sign. Ah. All right. So now we see we've gotten rid of the x and y axis titles. That's great. Now let's think about the interval. So we have a longer period of time than they had in the New York Times. We're going every 25 years currently. They went every 5 years. Let's try it by every 10 years. And so to do that, we can then do scale x continuous. And we'll do breaks equals, and we'll do a seek function going from, say, 1930 to 2025 by fives. So if our breaks don't include all the values we have on our x-axis, that's fine. It's not going to complain. So I don't actually know what this goes up to. I think we said it's 2023, but we'll roll with this. And so now what we get, I think I did every 5 years, right? Like the New York Times. And that's just way too much text on the x-axis. So let's go ahead and reduce that down to, say, 10, or increase it to 10. And here, then we've got the 40, 50, all the way up to 2020. I think that's a pretty good set of breaks. On the y-axis, then, we have ages. Theirs goes every 10 years, and ours is going every 10 years as well. But here, maybe we can go every 5 years. So let's then, in here, do scale y continuous. And we'll do, again, breaks equals seek from 10 to 50 by tens. Get a plus sign there. Oh, I did 10. 5. All right, there we go. So now we have it going 15 up to 45. And I think that's pretty good. A pretty good spacing on those. All right. Let's see. One other thing that I like about their ticks is that they're longer and thinner. than ours, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So let's change the length and the line width of those ticks. And so that's going to take two arguments to theme. So we'll do axis.ticks equals element line, and this will control the thickness of the line. So we'll do line width, or the width of the line, and let's start with 0.2. And that does get us a thinner line, maybe too thin, but let's lengthen it out and then we'll get a better sense of how that line thickness compares to the length, okay? So again, that's a different argument. So that's going to be axis.ticks.length equals unit. And so here we'll give it a size as well as the unit. I like to work in points for whatever reason. And let's try 3. So that didn't do much. So let's maybe up it to 5. Okay, so I think that's a little too long. So maybe we'll go down to say 4.5. And again, I'm not trying to like faithfully reproduce their figure. I'm trying to make it my figure, but I feel like that line is too long, just instinctively. So let's take it to 0. Oh, that's 40. That's not right. 44. Okay, I think that's good. One thing I forgot to do when I was messing with the dates and the years was to change the font, right? And so we're going to want all of the fonts in this plot to be that Franklin font. So we'll do text equals element text, and we'll do family equals Franklin, okay? And again, that Franklin is coming from back up here at the top where I used show text to get in the font from Google Fonts called Libre Franklin, and it's coming in as the Franklin family, okay? And so it's a subtle difference, but I think that looks good. I'm not going to mess with the size of the font on the axes. It seems a little bit big compared to what the New York Times had, but we'll hold off on that for now. One thing that they have in the New York Times that I liked is actually there's a space on the y-axis tick between the tick and the plot. And so the question then is, how do we do that? So I'm not aware of a margin argument to the right of the tick or to the right, to the left of the plotting window. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale on the x-axis, right? And so I believe we go back to 1933 on the x-axis. And so let's go back to 1932, right? And so here I'll do xlim, and we'll go 1932 to 20, or I'll put an NA. NA will tell R to pick the limit for the x-axis. And so now what we see, if I zoom in on this, is that now there's a space because we're seeing the background shining through, right? And so what I'd like to do then is go ahead and remove that background, okay? So let me zoom back out. And so now in theme, what I can do is panel.background equals element blank. And I'll go ahead and remove the grid lines. And so now, again, if I zoom in on the left, there's nothing there. And I have that kind of New York Times style space between the tick mark and the rest of the plot. And I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. What do you think? All right, so again, feel free. I could make the text bold in style. Yeah, so let's try that. I'm going to do that in the axis text because, yeah, let's go ahead and do that in the, we can do that in text. All right, so we could do no, it's face equals bold. So that's really bold, right? I feel like that's too bold for what I want to do. So I'm going to maybe take that back to regular. Oh, yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm going to remove that for now, just because that bold just seemed too bold to me. Okay, so we can come back and redress that here in a bit. Okay, now what I want to do is think about this legend, right? I like the style that they had for the New York Times. I like that it's off to the right. They've got the title to the left of it. So let's go ahead and try that. And yeah, so down here we did legend position bottom. We can justify it to the right by doing legend dot position or legend dot justification bottom equals right. Okay, so legend justification bottom right. I think it would make more sense to be legend bottom justification. I don't know, whatever. That then throws it over to the right, which I think is looking pretty good. And we'd like to make it more narrow from top to bottom, shorter and wider, right? So let's go ahead and worry about the height first. And so here within legend, we can change that height using the legend key height. Key height. And here we give it a unit function, right? And so I don't exactly know how big things should be. So let's start with 10 points. And as always, we can adjust from there. So that made it shorter. So let's go to say 7. Okay, let's go down to 5. Okay, split the difference and do 6. Okay, cool. So I think that's good. We want it to be wider though, right? And so by the same token that we did legend key height, we can also do legend dot key width, right? Unit. And again, let's try 10 pt. Get a comma at the end there. So that made it really narrow. We want it to be quite a bit longer. So let's maybe make it 20. And so that pulls it off to the left a bit. We're gonna have to do something with, so we either have to make it wider still. Let's go ahead and make it wider still, just because these numbers on the scale are running into each other, right? Okay, so let's go, let's try 30. So I think that looks pretty good. We can also make the legend text smaller. So before we mess with the legend text, these numbers, let's change the title. And so we could do that here in labs, or we could do it in scale fill Veritas. I think it's easier to do in labs. So we'll do fill equals age specific fertility rate. And so, yeah, so I feel like these fonts are all kind of big, right? So let's go ahead and shrink the font. So we'll do legend dot text title. Let's do legend title, because we might, oh, I guess they have kind of the same size font for the title and the text. Or maybe the title's a little smaller. Let's do title separate from the text. We'll do element text size equals 8. Okay, so that brings it down nicely. You'll notice that it's also like center justified on the overall legend. I want it to be top justified. And so that's another reason to split off the legend title from the legend text. because here then we can do vjust equals 1. And we see that that then moves it up to make it look like it's more justified on that stream of colors, right? So now let's go ahead and shrink down the font on the legend text there, okay? All right, so then we'll do legend.text equals element text. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. Let's do 8.5. All right, that didn't seem to change anything. Let's take that down to 8. So it makes it, yeah. Let's try 7.5. I think that's pretty good. I had felt that like their title was a little bit smaller, the same size as their text, but who knows, maybe not. Let's go ahead and move the text up towards the color bar, right? It seems a little bit too far separated compared to what they have. So let's go ahead then in legend text, and let's try margin equals margin T. I'll put it at 0. I always like to use extreme values and then adjust. Okay, so that's extreme, right? That's right up against it. So that means I know this is the parameter I want to modify, right? So let's go ahead and make this say 2. And we go a little bit more. Let's try 3. Cool. I think that looks good. And that is nice for our legend. Cool. One thing that I'm noticing that I recall when someone asked about the theme function was what theme I was using. So I was using theme gray is the default. And what that does to all of the text is make it gray, right? So like our axis text is a gray color. It's not black like everything else, right? So if I come in here, I think I can do color equals black. And I don't know if you can tell, but to me at least that kind of crisps up the color a bit to make it a stronger color, more black, right? Cool. All right. So we're getting there, right? Again, it's not a perfect match, but it's pretty, it's the style, right? So let's go ahead then and think about the titles that we want to put in to the plot. So we want to put something in for the title of the overall plot, as well as a caption in the lower right corner. And so I think what we'll do is I will say as a title that the baby boom was between 1946 and 1964. So I'll come in here and do title equals the US baby boom was between 1946 and 1964. And then as a caption, again, as a caption, they had source times banner analysis of NCHS mortality data. I think what we had over here was data source human fertility database. So I think I'm going to go ahead and copy this as the caption. And we'll put this in here in quotes and get a comma there. And so then under all these windows is my plot. There we go. And so now we have the title and we have the caption. So we need to do some work to clean these up a bit. So I prefer to have my title be justified like the New York Times version, where it's left justified on the overall plot, not on the panel. So mine is left justified on the panel rather than the plot. To move that over, we can do plot.title position equals plot, right? And then we could also do plot.caption position equals plot. So that will also be justified on the plot rather than on the panel. Okay, and so you can already see that the title is left justified now on the plot rather than on the panel. And the caption is right justified on the plot rather than on the panel, although that you can't quite see it here, right? So let's go ahead then and left justify the caption so it's on the left side like theirs is. And we'll do plot dot caption element text, and we'll do hjust for horizontal justification equals 0. And so that then gets that to be left justified. Okay, cool. All right, so to style the title a bit, I'm going to go ahead and bolden this so that it pops more, and maybe make it a little bit smaller of a font to do a better job of kind of being between where I am now and what the New York Times has. I feel like the New York Times is a little small, but we'll see. So let's go ahead and do plot.title equals element text, and we'll do face equals bold, and then size, I'll start with 13 and go from there. Oh, bold needs to be in quotes. So I got it bolded, okay. But let's shrink it down a little bit. Let's try 11. I think that's good. Maybe let's do 12. Oh, I didn't actually change it. 12. All right, so I think that's good, okay. Now the caption in theirs is gray and it's smaller, right? So let's go ahead then and we'll do color equals gray. Let's do 40. It's a little bit darker than the normal gray. And we'll do size equals, and what was the size of the legend? 8. Let's do 9. Okay. And maybe that could move up a little bit. Or sorry, let's shrink it down a little bit. So like, let's do 8. Okay. And so one thing I recall from the Our World in Data, oops, that wasn't what I wanted, or that. All right, this, is that the data source is bolded and everything else is a plain font, right? So let's go ahead and yeah, so Renzi says you'll come to it perhaps, but could you the colored boxes be more square? As it is now, it's very uneasy for my eyes. We'll get there. Yeah, thanks for that. You're thinking in the right direction. Okay, so again, the caption in my version, I want to make that data source to be bold, right? And so I can do that with Markdown by coming back to data source and putting 2 stars around data source. But to get the Markdown to render, I need to use element Markdown rather than element text for plot caption. And I need to also load ggtext, which I already have loaded because that's just one of the most common packages that I use after tidyverse and show text. And so now you can see that I've got data source as bolded, and that looks great. Something that I'm noticing with these titles is that I have a lot of space between my legend and the bottom of the x-axis, and I could perhaps have a little bit more space underneath this. But before I mess with that spacing, let's go and take on what Renzi was saying, right? About the rectangles, right? So in the New York Times version, the rectangles lay horizontally, whereas mine, they're vertically. So how can we flip that, right? So that's ultimately going to be a matter of the aspect ratio. So let's go back and do width equals 7.44 and height equals 6. Width. Okay. And so they're still taller than they are wide. And so we could drop this height down to say 4. And that makes them square. If we made it 3, that starts to make them more rectangular. But I feel like it's getting too short, right? And so I think what I'd rather have, instead of them being kind of rectangles, I realize I'd rather have them be squares. And I realize a square is a rectangle, but I think you know what I mean, right? So to get that, instead of chord Cartesian, I think what I'll do is chord equal. And chord equal then will make the spacing on the x-axis the same as the spacing on the y-axis, right? So like from the space from 1960 to 1970 will be the same as that length between 1960 and 1970 will be the same as the length between, say, 20 and 30. So let's give that a shot. And so now we get squares, right? I kind of like the squares, but our aspect ratio is all out of whack because now we have all this white space on the sides, right? So let's go ahead and take this back up to say 5. Okay, and so now we've filled that in, but we perhaps need to shrink down a little bit more. So let's do 4.5. That brings it in. Okay, let's just try a 4. Okay. So I feel like that does a pretty good job of getting us square tiles that aren't as hard to look at. Let me know what you think of this, Renzi. My eyes, thank you. Good. And so in some ways, this is what they had for the New York Times version, right? But one thing they had were these tick marks, these lines, showing the generation of men born between 1951 and 1970, right? So I don't know that this is a cohort-based effect as much as it is like a time period effect, right? And so one of the things I think is really nice about this is that you can see that there were a decent number of births in like, I want to say 44 or 43, 44, right? 1943, 1944. And then it dips. And then in 1946, it picks up again. And the black here ends at about 1964, right? So let's go ahead and draw in vertical lines to indicate when the baby boom was, all right? All right. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to come back up here, and after geom tile, I'm going to do geom vline, and we'll do x-intercept equals, and I'm going to give it a vector of values. And so these values I give it will be where it draws vertical lines. And so we'll do 1947 or 46 and 1964. And there we go. But again, we kind of have that problem where it's drawing it in the middle of the tile for that year. And so I think what we'll do instead is move the 1946 back to like 1945.5 and the 1964 to 1964.5, basically to move them to the left and right edge of those tiles. So let's come back up here, and this will be 45.5, and this will be 1964.5. So again, that puts it on the right side of those tiles. Those lines seem to me to be pretty strong and bold and pronounced. Let's make them a little bit thinner. So let's come up here and we'll do line width equals 0.3. So that's a lot. I think, yeah, it's not as pronounced as it was before with I think it's like 0.5 or 0.75 is the default line thickness. So I think that looks pretty good without being too obnoxious. What I'd like to do also is perhaps put right up in here, baby boom, right? With maybe arrows going out from it, right? And so I think we could do that with an annotate. And maybe we'll just draw an arrow. Well, let's draw the arrow and then go from there. Okay, so we'll come back up here to where I put in the geom v line, and let's go ahead and do an annotate, and we'll do geom equals segment, and we're going to want x coordinates. So the x is going to be the x starting position, which I think is going to be 1945.5. X end is going to be 1964.5. And then y, where do we want to place this? So I could see putting it at like 44. Okay, and so 44. And because it's a flat horizontal line, we don't need a y end. I could also do y end equals 44, but that's extra typing. Who has time for that? So let's go ahead and place this in. And so now we see we have that horizontal bar. I'd like it to be the same line thickness as the vertical lines though, right? So let's come up here and we'll do line width equals 0.3. I misspelled width. So that makes it thinner. But I would like to have caps, like an arrow, or arrows capping that segment. And so to do that, we can come back up here to my annotate statement, and I can do arrow equals arrow. Forget if it's arrow or arrows. We'll see. Okay, so it gets us an arrow at one end. It's open and it's big. So let's look at the help for arrow. And we'll try this one. All right, and I'm going to go arrow from grid. All right, so let's come back up here where I was doing the annotate with geom segment, right? And so this is the arrow function. So there's the angle, the length, the ends, and the type. So I'm going to say length equals unit 3 pt. So instead of being this long arrow, I want it to be smaller. And then also the ends, I'm going to set to be both. So instead of only having it at one end, I want it at both ends, right? And then the default is type open, and I realize you can't see what I'm doing. I'm sorry. All right. I see your comment, Rents. Just give me a minute here. Right, so as I was saying, we want to change the length of the arrow, and so we can do it with length unit equals 0.25. I'm going to instead do unit 3 pt, ends both instead of ends last, so that'll put arrows on both ends. And then for the type, its default is open, but what I want is closed, so that it fills in with basically a triangle as the arrow. So we'll do type equals closed. And so then let's go ahead, put these on separate lines. All right. Okay. And let's see what it looks like, sorry. So good. So now we have the smaller arrow. Perhaps it's too small. So let's increase that a little bit. Again, back up here and annotate. Let's try 5. Cool. We can change the angle on that using an angle argument to arrow. So let's do angle And I think the default for angle is 30. And so to make it tighter, maybe we could go to say 20. Okay, so angle equals 20. Yeah, and so that brings it in. That looks pretty nice. Yeah. And so I think, Rents, you had a question. Could you line up the vertical lines on the same color? Right vertical line, one block to the right. Not totally sure what that means. All right. Maybe what you mean is instead of putting it right through 44, putting it like between the tiles. So we could do that for sure with like 44.5. We'll put it between those tiles, right? Moves it up just a smidge. And I think that's pretty good. Maybe one last thing that I will try here is to play with this spacing. There's a lot going on at the bottom without much benefit, right? So part of it, I think, is still the height is off. So let's try 3.8. Oh, and forgot a close parentheses here. So that brings it in. Let's try 3.7. Okay, I think it should have been 3.8. Basically, I want to set the height so that I'm not adding extra margin to the sides. Okay, good. And so now what I want to do is move my legend up vertically. And so to do that, we can come back up into the theme function. I like to put all of my theme arguments together that go together, right? Like I've got all these legend things together, all these axis things together, all the plot things together, right? So we can do legend.margin equals margin. And I'll do t equals 0. Again, going with that extreme value to start. There must be extra margin up here. Maybe there's another legend argument. Let's see. Legend dot, is it spacing? Maybe it's legend box margin. Yeah, legend box margin. Okay. Let's try legend box margin. So I don't know that that did anything. Maybe I want both. Let's go back to legend margin. Okay, that brought that up, but there's still space there, right? So let's then add legend box margin. That doesn't change anything. I think I'm going to be happy with that. That's fine, right? And it did, I can see now that there is more padding at the bottom and top of the plot. That's fine. Maybe the caption, we can move that up a bit. So in here then we could do margin equals margin t equals 0. And so that, of course, brings it up pretty nicely. And so now we can go ahead and further reduce the height of the figure. Let's go to 3.6. That brings it down without changing the left and right margins. I think that's pretty good. And I think I'll call it there. Let me know what you think of this. So Rents kind of comes back to this line that I had. The lines are now on different colors, but the colors have a meaning to it. So maybe better to align the period lines to the same color. Yeah, I guess here I don't think the black will get. So I guess my first concern would be causing my reader confusion about what colors represent, right? And I think I think it's clear that the vertical lines indicate the period 1946 and 1964. I don't know. My concern, though, if I made those lines a color to match the fertility rate for that year, would be what color to make those lines. Like, I guess it could be an average, but then that average is going to be probably pretty low on the grand scheme of things, right? I don't know. I'm okay with leaving it black. I encourage you all to get the code and play with it yourselves and see what works well for you. As I kind of played with this, I get other thoughts of ways to interpret this figure. Hey, Lionel, thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody for joining. This is great. I really enjoy the interaction that we're having. As I look at this, so my mind goes in a few directions, right? So first of all, there's like interpretation, right? So this is like a baby boom, but why doesn't the baby boom go out to like 1974, right? Like there's high fertility out to like 1970, 71, right? Why does it end so abruptly here? Or why doesn't the baby boom start like at 1950? At least according to these data. And that's again where I'm not a demographer. I don't know how these periods are determined. 1946 was a year after the end of World War II. And so basically the soldiers came back home and they got married and they started having babies, right? And so, yeah, but like, why doesn't it end later? I don't know. Maybe it's just arbitrary, right? But the other thing I noticed that's really fascinating, and I'm sure lots of people have been talking about, and that's no doubt why all this fertility data has been in the news, is because if you look to more recent times, there is like the fertility rate is really low for that same age group, right? And so that's something I see in this plot really shares, right? Really tells us that basically, you know, women between the ages of like 20 and 25 were having a lot of babies, or a lot of them were having babies, right? Whereas if we fast forward to 2020, in last 10 years, last 15 years, there's none, right? That more and more women are waiting until the 30s to have babies, right? And so these are just trends, right? And who knows what to make of them? It's a little bit worrisome to many people what that means long term, right? That at least in the US, we have like the social security system that depends on taxing the young to pay for the old. And so what does that mean if there's no young people here in about 20 years to pay for my retirement or whoever's retirement, right? But anyway, I think this plot does a really nice job of showing that and raising all sorts of questions. So that's like interpretation. Another question that this gets me thinking about is that age perhaps isn't so important for, again, defining the baby boom. Perhaps it's an overall fertility rate, right? And so in which case you can have like fertility rate on the y-axis and year on the x-axis, and that might do a better job of showing the baby boom, right? So, and then if you wanted, yeah, I don't know, like, so there's all sorts of questions. And like any good data visualization, any good analysis, one question leads to a bunch of other questions. And that's what I find so fun about science and data visualization. All right, so I would guess the boom is characterized by an increase compared to previous periods from LG. Yeah, most likely. And that there was like a dip here, right, in kind of 1944, 45. And so Rentz asks, this is a good explanation, but shouldn't there be also horizontal lines? So I think the horizontal lines would be for defining the age, right? So if I were to say like, if I were to make like a strong point about the lack of babies being born in 2020 compared to back when, or that the fertility rate is changing by age, then maybe I would draw those horizontal lines to kind of frame the story. But here it's more about the baby boom as it was kind of pitched by the article. I was talking about the baby boom, not so much kind of the baby bust, if you will, over the last 10, 15 years. But all sorts of, there are no perfect visualizations that answer all the questions. And so that's why this is, it's always a challenge, right? To tell a story with one figure, that there's all sorts of stuff that could be going on that would cause you to ask other questions. Yeah, so the boom is defined perhaps by periods in time, not by age, vertical, right? Yep. All right. So this is all I had planned for today. Last week's one was my first one and went kind of long, and it was a lot more challenging to make. If people have any other questions about this, let me know here before we sign off. I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have. I do think it's valuable to be practicing our craft by making other people's visualizations. And of course, as that person who asked the question commented, that we do then need to take what we've learned and apply it to something else, right? And so this, again, was my attempt to take something from our world and data and apply it back to something, or taking what we'd done previously from the New York Times and apply it to new data that I found from our world and data. That if I go back to their site, I don't think any of the 7 charts were a heat map, right? So let's see. So again, this is that idea of kind of looking at the average fertility rate over time, doing it by country, kind of linking it to increased marriage rates, that as people got married, they had more babies. But yeah, nowhere in here did I find a heat map. So I think this was a unique contribution to that question. And thank you all for joining in. And I see you all. So thanks, Rents and LG and Silvio and Lionel for all your questions and comments over the course of the live stream, and Mikolaj. And I'm sorry for butchering everybody's names. I'm sorry. I get the sense that people are tuning in from overseas, which also just always excites me to see so many people from outside of my normal reach of people I see on my campus and that I'm able to work with. So encourage you to get the data once it's posted, play with it, and do your own refactoring to answer any of the questions that you might have about the data. All right. So this will be posted as a recording for anybody to watch later. Please share this episode with all your friends so that they know what we're doing here. And we'll see you next week for another live stream here on the Riffimonas YouTube channel. Thank you all.